Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ask Kati Anything. I'm your host, licensed marriage and family therapist, Kati Morton. I'm so glad that you're here. Today is our last AKA in this style. It's not to say that I won't do these off and on, but as I've mentioned earlier, we are going to be taking a break and we're going to be relaunching AKA March 6th with more interviews with experts, creators, celebrities, professional athletes, people sharing their stories, insights, and expertise so we can learn along with them. So hang tight, we will be back, but today's episode will be the last one until March 6th. Now, this week we're going to talk about how we can get comfortable expressing our anger. I'm also going to talk about how long is too long to see the same therapist, and if it's possible to be too close to our mom growing up. Then I'm going to explain why looking up our therapist on social media and seeing that they have a family and friends and things like that can make us feel bad or sad or sometimes even jealous a little bit. And whether or not binge listening to this podcast or other mental health podcasts is a good or bad thing for your mental health. Without further ado, let's jump into question number 1. This question says, "Hey Kati, I hope you're well. My question is, how do I get more comfortable expressing my anger?" Good question. I have a problem expressing anger. I can feel it, but then I don't know what to do with it. A lot of people have said that they find it hard to know what I'm feeling because I can say that I'm angry or pissed off, but I don't look it or sound it. Although I can say I'm angry, I can never say it in the moment or to the person that I'm angry with. My therapist, on the other hand, knows instantly. I can tell her I'm doing good, and she will give me that therapist look that says, "I know you're lying." I know that look. Or I can say I'm angry in a normal tone, and she'll say something like, "I can see you're angry. Shall we talk about it?" At this point, I'm sure she uses some sort of witchcraft. Only joking. Anyways, we've talked about how I find it hard to be angry, or rather express it. For example, I don't raise my voice or get aggressive in any way. I just swallow it and take whatever has happened. My therapist asked me to try a role play activity with her, which I did. It was based on something I was hurt or angry about, and she told me to say exactly what I wanted to say, however I needed to. During this, I felt myself rising in anger. For example, my body was tensing, my voice getting slightly raised. And then upon realizing this, it was like my brain was like, "Oh shit, no, don't sound angry. Calm yourself down." And then I started laughing. Ugh, oh God, how I wanted the ground to swallow me up. We talked about it after and discussed the fact that she could see I was releasing anger, but when I actually released it, or when I realized it, I made myself stop. We discussed some of it being a defensive mechanism, but also because I knew my anger wasn't directed at my therapist and I was uncomfortable getting angry at her, even though it wasn't actually at her, and she knew that. I hope this makes sense. This makes a lot of sense. And as someone who is also uncomfortable with anger and has worked on this a lot in my therapeutic work and even in my own homework, I have a lot of thoughts and hopefully some helpful insights. Now, overall, when it comes to anger, for a lot of us, especially if we grew up in a home either that expressed anger a lot or didn't express it at all, it's hard for us. And the reason both of these extremes affect our ability to express anger is because, number one, if it was expressed all the time in our home and that meant abuse, whether that's emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, whatever the case, we saw anger as something that was very hurtful, dangerous, and out of control. On the other hand, if our family, parents, our nuclear family growing up never expressed anger, we don't know what healthy expression looks like. We don't even understand our own anger because the only thing that we saw represented or demonstrated was to stuff it down, right? Shut it down. And so anger is unknown, meaning it can feel very dangerous. It can feel like we aren't sure what to expect and we can't protect ourselves or predict it. It's very scary. We can be scared of the unknown, right? And so for both those reasons, we don't know how to express our own anger. It's uncomfortable. And rightfully so. But the good news is that we can learn about our anger. We can get comfortable with it and we can find ways to healthily express it. If our anger comes from that kind of abuse situation, right? Like in our household growing up, anger was expressed a lot and there was emotional abuse, physical abuse, or what have you, we're going to have to work through that trauma or that abuse that happened in order to understand our relationship with anger and to find a better way of interacting with it. And the reason I say we have to work through our trauma is because if we don't, anytime we try to engage with anger, we see anger being expressed or we express it ourselves, it's going to be incredibly triggering. Because if you remember, we would have associated that with being hurt, whether that's emotional pain or physical pain or whatever. It's still too overwhelming. It can be too emotionally charged. And so working through the trauma, whether that's through EMDR, whether that's through talking it out, whether that's through parts work or whatever, we're going to have to do that work so that we can engage with our anger without having that sort of visceral knee-jerk reaction. Okay? Once we've done that work, okay, so let's say we're working through our trauma. We can do this simultaneously, by the way. It's not like we have to work through the trauma, then we can do the anger piece. While we're doing that work, I would encourage you all, and this even pertains to the other type of people whose parents, like myself, whose family didn't express anger, so we're like, we don't know how to do it. It's important to start to consider your beliefs about anger. What I mean by that is when someone gets angry at you, or you're worried someone is angry at you, what does that mean? What do we tell ourselves about it? When we witness someone in an argument, what do we think that means? And the reason I bring it up this way is because we have to consider the stories that we tell ourselves or the beliefs that we have about anger. For example, we could think if there was abuse in our home that anger equates to pain and being hurt. If anger was never expressed in our home, we can think anger means things are out of control, something big is wrong, this relationship can never sustain it, we have to run away, maybe. And these are just examples, right? We can have all sorts of different thoughts about it. But we have to figure out the story we're telling ourselves about anger, because in that story is the answer to getting out. For myself, my personal example, is that because in my home growing up, no one ever got angry. Like if my parents ever argued, it was when my brother and I were like going to bed or something. And I'd kind of hear it, but I didn't really know what was going on. It didn't really sound like their voices weren't raised very much. It was more like kind of hushed talking, but like, it was a discussion, but they never like yelled in front of us ever. And therefore, I believed that if someone was actually angry and expressed it in what I would call now a very healthy manner, I thought something horrific must be happening, that something terrible has taken place, that I have really hurt this person so much so that the relationship is beyond repair. Anger felt like something so extreme because I'd never witnessed it in a healthy way. I never saw my parents get angry and then come back together. I never saw them get angry at me and tell me, hey, I'm really angry at you. I forgive you because I asked for an apology. I apologize and they forgive me. I never got to see any of that because it was kind of just tucked away, stuffed down. Okay? So we have to figure out what that story is so we can untangle it. Because then for me, realizing that the story I tell myself is that anger means the relationship is beyond repair, that things are ending, that something horrible happened, my way out is to challenge that. Meaning that I have to maybe visually imagine myself doing this. Maybe it's like I practice doing it. Maybe I do it with my therapist, I do it with Sean, start practicing in my relationships, expressing upsets, expressing anger, that made me mad. I didn't like that you did that and that made me angry. And then seeing that you can express that, talk about it, and come back together. So we're setting ourselves up to have different experiences to challenge that belief. Because I will tell you that we can try to challenge beliefs in our heads with our thoughts. Like, well, but I see other people, get in arguments. Like my friends got in a fight and then they're friends again. Like we can challenge it with these other examples, but the strongest example are going to be the ones that you actually create yourself, the behaviors you do, the relationships that you take to that next level, that you express anger or upset and then repair, right? And in the case, if we think that anger means there's going to be some kind of physical or emotional pain and hurt, like abuse is going to happen, then we have to not only look out at other examples where that's not the case, but also in our own life, express anger to someone and then work to repair, knowing that abuse or harm doesn't have to be a part of that, right? And the anger doesn't have to be so big in order for it to be the point to still get across. And those can all be things we can work through with our therapist. But I say all of that because in this question, how do we get more comfortable expressing our anger? The real answer is we have to figure out the story we tell ourselves. Because in this case, you're saying like, I don't feel safe to do it. Because once you feel yourself getting angry, you start laughing. Or you shut it down. You make sure you don't sound angry. It's like, I have this. Nope, I can't. And why can't you? Where does it come from for you? Maybe there's another option in there. Those are the two that I see the most, but maybe there's another one in there where it's like, last time I got angry, I never talked to that person again. I don't know. But I think whatever it is, once we figure out the belief that we have or the story we tell ourselves about our anger, then we can kind of untangle it. And expressing it takes practice. It takes a lot of internal work. For me, especially as like a recovering people pleaser, anger meant that I could damage a relationship, that I could end something, right? I thought that because in my experience, anger meant something horribly has gone wrong and the relationship is beyond repair, then for me to express it, the people pleaser in me was like, no. That's going to ruin this. They're going to be upset. They're going to get mad. This is going to end this relationship, right? That's where I would go. I'd go from here to there. I'd turn a molehill into a mountain. And so I had to figure that out. And then I had to teach myself that through practice, that showing anger is just that, showing anger. And people get angry because we get hurt, and realizing really what was happening for me internally. Does that make sense? I hope so. Now, I do want to address before we move on about the piece where your therapist said that this is like a some kind of defense mechanism. I think that's what they said. And I'm looking, a defense mechanism. The reason is that it's protective, right? All that I'm talking about, this like, if I had abuse in my past, or no one ever expressed it in my family growing up, or I'm afraid it's going to ruin my relationships. Like all of that means that expressing anger feels dangerous. And so therefore we don't, as a way to protect ourselves and our relationships. And that's part of it. And so in that piece, along with understanding, the beliefs we have about anger, or the story we tell ourselves about it, it can also be helpful for us to consider what we think we're protecting ourselves from when we stuff it down. So when you felt anger and then you're like, don't sound angry, calm yourself down, like internally, like alarms are going off. What do you think you're protecting yourself from? If this is your defense, what's what are we defending against? Who are we up against? What is this thing that we feel is a threat? Think about it. Give yourself a minute. Because for me, that threat was loneliness, right? That threat was erosion of important relationships, connections. That was the threat for me. The threat was the anxiety that I'll feel when other people aren't happy or pleased around me. And so that all is helpful information as you learn to express your anger. I wish I could just say, start expressing it, start writing about it. That can sometimes help, but I find that can often make it worse because we're not really preparing ourselves. We're not being thoughtful about how we express it, and potentially without realizing it could be setting ourselves up to have those same type of experiences where either you stuff it down, shut it down, or in my case, maybe I like erupt really in a big way and then I do damage a relationship, right? We have to be more thoughtful about it, take our time expressing what we're feeling, figuring out how to do it in a way that's actually helpful, that grows a relationship and doesn't end it. Okay? I hope that makes sense. Let's move on to question number 2. This question says, Kati, how long is too long to stay with one therapist? Is it healthy to stay with one for many years? It's been close to 6 years. I know at some point things could change as people leave. I'm worried all the time things will change, and I feel like I'm in mourning when it ends. That's a great question. And the truth about being with one therapist, it's too long when we, number one, don't feel like we're making progress anymore. We have to be honest with ourselves. Because comfortability is not progress. Progress means we feel challenged. Progress means that our therapist, pushes us past the point of comfortability. It means our therapist is still asking us tough questions and sending us home with homework, if that's their style, to do in between. We still feel like we're improving week after week, month after month. These aren't leaps and bounds of improvement, but we should still feel challenged, right? If we don't feel challenged, if we feel like it's just catching up with a friend and we're just chitty-chatting, then it's probably been too long. Okay? Other than that, there's no real limit to how long we should be with a therapist. There's no, after X amount of years, that's too long, sayonara. Some therapists will say that if they practice specific types of therapy, like even CBT, DBT, EMDR, some of those can technically, if we like follow it rigidly, can have kind of these parameters around like, well, we've done this and this and this and this, and now you've completed this process. You have completed the stages of CBT, let's see, or cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT's dialectical behavior therapy. So those can have endings, but it's usually not very rigid. It's very fluid because everybody's different. The main thing I want to make sure is that we're still progressing. We're still finding benefit. And the benefit is not just consistency and like that you feel like your fear of abandonment is assuaged. I want it to be more than that. It needs to be challenging you. Actually, a therapist who's good at their job, if we have attachment issues, is consistent and does help us manage what comes up for us. But the goal would be for us to manage the discomfort that comes with knowing that relationships end and helping us navigate that and pushing us out. They might not see us for a week and then see us and see how that went and check back in. That be part of the homework. So we should still feel challenged, okay? That's really it. There's no other answer. There's no exact amount of time we should be in therapy. Everyone's going to be different. And like I've told you guys for years, I've been in and out of therapy since I was 15. I'm 41 and I was in therapy last year for a long time. And then I stopped around, I think it was like June or July, and took a break, and I'm on a break right now and I could pop back in. I've actually been thinking maybe I should. So just know that there's no set amount of time. We should just feel like we're still moving towards our goals. We should have goals and we should feel challenged. Okay. Moving on to question number 3, it says, hey, Kati, is there such a thing as being too attached and close to your mother growing up? Can it cause a child to grow up to be codependent, or rather overly dependent? I find that I always ask for my mom's opinions and reassurance and approval for everything because she's so intelligent and insightful. So I've learned my whole life to trust her opinions more than my own. Ooh. I wouldn't call my mom a helicopter parent in any other way apart from this aspect of being very eager to jump in and provide her opinions and thoughts and insights. I wish I was more independent and had more confidence in myself. What are your thoughts on this and how can I work on this? This is a great question. I also just finished rewatching Gilmore Girls, and we can have a close relationship with our mom, but our mom should not always be putting in her opinions or insights. I don't know if you've watched Gilmore Girls, not to make it about that, but at the end of, this is just spoilers, but you should have watched it. It's been out forever. At the end of the whole series, Rory gets asked to marry Logan. Logan asked her to marry him, and she asked her mom for her thoughts on it. And she's like, I can't give you have to decide for yourself. That's a healthy dynamic. A mom should not be telling you what to do all the time. I know people might say, Kati, you're not a parent. You don't understand. These are adults. And you can give your insights if you've been there before, but you really want to encourage your children in general to make choices for themselves. It's like that. There's a big piece of parenting. If you haven't read the research on this, I'm sure you can Google it using some keywords. But it's actually really healthy for you to watch your children fail. And I don't mean like fail horribly and end up living on the streets. That's not what I mean. I mean, like even when they're little, when they're, doing something that they don't know how to do, you shouldn't help them. Watch them learn. Watch them not know how. I feel like, unfortunately, because we're so afraid sometimes to let our children fail at something, not be good, not know how, that we can all grow up being afraid to try new things. Because if we're all by ourselves and mom or dad's not there to swoop in and teach us how or make sure it happens correctly, then we don't know how to do it ourselves. And it's important for our growth and development as adults even to try and be bad at something, but try anyway, to do something new and fail at it and go again. That's a really big key piece of learning. And the most important piece is it builds our self-esteem and confidence. And so if we don't get that, in this person's case, they didn't get that. Their mom always jumped in and gave all the insights and gave you all the answers. You never got to learn on your own. You never got to make a bad decision. It's okay to make a bad decision. We're learning. I'm learning, you're learning, we're all still learning forever and ever, unfortunately, but it's also part of our growth as people, right? And there are even things now in my life that I can say with 100% confidence that my mom hasn't been through because she has a different life, right? Your mom does not have your life. So she does not know everything. I know we want to think our parents know everything, but I feel like as we get older, when we don't have this unhealthy attachment, we can see our parents for who they are, which is fallible humans, just like everybody else. Like I used to think my dad seriously could fix or repair anything, like home, car, you name it. And as I got older, I realized, well, he's not an electrician. Like he actually would call his dad. My grandpa was an electrician. He'd have him do that stuff. So like, even if I asked my dad, he might have some idea of it, but he would still ask my papa about it because he doesn't really know. So he doesn't know everything. And I know that's a small, silly example, but that's just one of thousands of things our parents don't know. And so in this case, the answer is yes, you can be too attached and too close to a parent because you don't feel confident in making your own choices. You have to turn to your mom. And that's not healthy. We can turn to our elders, people who are older than us that have been there before, and ask for their advice sometimes. But I really want to challenge you, especially the person who asked this question, to make up your own mind on things most of the time. We need to start choosing things without asking our mom's opinion. And I even might tell your mom you're working on this and ask that she not offer her opinion. Say, I'm trying to be more confident in myself, and, my therapist or this therapist online that I talk to believes that I kind of need to do it on my own. So even if I ask you, I need you to not tell me, and see if she'll do that. Because what's happened here is that we do have a very dependent relationship, meaning you don't feel safe to make decisions on your own. You feel like you have to ask for her insights and her advice. And in order to undo that, we have to slowly prove that we can. And that will allow you to be more independent. That will allow you to build that confidence in yourself. And that does not mean, I don't want anybody out there thinking, oh, that means that if I do this, then everything I'm going to choose is going to be fine anyway. We will slip up. We'll make bad choices. I've made plenty of fucking terrible choices in my life, but I learn from them. I grow from them. And then I grow more confident in my ability to discern between something that's going to work out and something that isn't, because I actually did it myself. I considered, maybe I pros and cons it a little bit. Maybe I thought about what's more valuable to me. Why does this feel so much more important? Is that an old pattern? There's a lot to think about, but I give myself the time to think about it and then make a decision. And I want that for you too. And so really, yes, you can be too close to your mom growing up. There's definitely a dependence here. And the way to work on this is to start challenging yourself to make some decisions on your own. Like when you reach for your phone to text or call your mom, I want you to think, could I at least think about this first? What's my opinion on this? Do I think this is beneficial to do this? Or what's my knee-jerk reaction before we ask her? And then maybe tell her not to give you her advice. And you also need to not call her as often about it. Make some decisions on your own. See how it goes. We're just going to have to tippy-toe into this. It's not all or nothing, remember. It's a little at a time. So pick some of the smaller items first as we build up into bigger decisions. But I will say, even personally, someone who is very close to their mom, when I'm making a large decision in my life, let's say, like when I was trying to apply for jobs and stuff, and like, oh, I got this offer, this position, I think I'm going to take it. Sometimes I'll still call my mom and ask, what's your opinion on this? I guess at my age now, it's fewer and far in between, but I will still call for her thoughts on things. Like, I think I'm going to do this. I'm telling her already what my decision is, but I'm asking her for do you think that's right? I think it's right, and I get her insights, her thoughts on it, even though maybe I've already made the decision, or maybe I am pretty sure what my choice is. I give myself an opportunity to come around to it. And then I might ask her at the end a little bit for what her thoughts are, but I at least need to do that recon on myself. On my own first. Does that make sense? So little by little, let's move you to making more decisions on your own. And you can do it. You got this. Okay, moving on to question number 4. This question says, hello, says, I hope you're doing well. I am. I hope you're doing well. I have found that I occasionally look up my therapist on social media. You wouldn't be alone. I'm not able to see much. Of course, that's by design. But I'm able to see some things because we have some mutual friends. Interesting. When I see that they're happy in their marriage, laughing in pictures, or that they have friends they're spending time with, why does that make me so sad? I usually get anxious and I want to cry. I don't have a spouse or a family of my own. So I wonder if it's just that, or I wonder if it's just that I so badly long for that I fear I'll never have it. But then I also wonder if it's just because I wish I could be my therapist's friend and they like me outside of session. I know this isn't ethical, so it won't happen. But I don't know why just seeing them happy makes me sad. I don't feel that way when I see other people so happy. Why does it bother me? And how do I not let it? I often fear that I am too much and I have a hard time seeing and believing the good stuff about myself. I want to just be happy when I see people so happy. For context, I was emotionally neglected, bullied, and physically and sexually abused. I do have complex PTSD, and I'm obviously in therapy, but I fear I'll never get to a point where someone will want to be in my life. Okay, this is a great question, and it could come from a couple of places, and it sounds like you kind of have an idea already. Now, first of all, looking up our therapists on social media is something we're all going to do, but I'm going to tell you, because I feel like I need to, it's not helpful. It's not worth it. You aren't going to be able to see much because you're not supposed to. And a lot of therapists, I was even just talking to a colleague of mine at this family online safety event that I went to, I spoke at, and she was on the panel with me. And she was saying that it's prohibited for her at the job that she has to have social media that's not completely private. Because we were talking about, I was like, you should have a podcast. Like, she has so many great insights. I'm going to have her on the podcast. Don't worry. But she has such great insights. And I was like, oh, you should have a podcast. She's like, oh no, they prohibit it. I can't. And that's because people can look things up and draw conclusions based on things. And that could be like, oh, they could know that you're Jewish or you're Christian or you're whatever. Or they could know that, you're married or not married, you have kids or don't have kids, or maybe you come from a wealthy family or you come from a poor family. And I know that all sounds really silly, but that can all guide what a patient might think about you. They can make assumptions about it, and that can color all of their therapeutic sessions with you. And that's part of the reason also why I don't see patients anymore. I don't know if many of you know that, but I stopped seeing patients when we moved to Texas. Obviously, I kept my license in California. I still have my license in Texas now as well, but I've put a lot of myself out there, and that can color how a patient might see me and make the therapy that I'm offering not as effective for them. And therapy is all about you as the patient, right? So keeping all that in mind, when you look in this person's case, because I definitely was on a tangent, I'm sorry. But when you look up your therapist and you see that they're happy and they have family and friends and, all of that stuff, they're happy in their marriage, I think it's a reminder of potentially the fact that you feel like you won't get to a point where you'll have someone that'll want to be in your life. It's like it's kind of digging into a wound that you maybe have that you're kind of working on, but it exists because of your complex PTSD and being neglected and bullied and all of that stuff. It could definitely be triggering that way. But I also think there's something in here, because you said it doesn't bother you for other people. I think it bothers you with your therapist because of the attachment issues that can come along with complex PTSD. Now, I know we talk about attachment a lot, but when it comes to complex PTSD, especially with our therapist, we can feel this almost like our therapist is our healer. And they're the one that we're going to put in whatever wound has been left by our past. That could be like a parent wound. So we put them in that void thinking they can be my mom or my dad. But sometimes, especially when we've been bullied, we can find we want to put our therapist in that friend void where we feel like no one ever really got me. I didn't have any close friends. No one was actually ever really caring to me. This person is. They can be that friend for me. They can fill that void. And then when we see our therapist outside of session stuff online, having a good time, having friends around and family, we realize we're not part of that. And it almost like tears at that wound and tries to pull the therapist out of that void. And we feel that void even more. Hence why you're feeling, I'm never going to get to the point where someone will want to be in my life. We're replaying this old story because we're aware that that wound still exists. We tried to fill it with our therapist, but it's still there because we see they have a life and we're not in that life. And as hard as that is maybe for even to hear me say, that's why I've talked about this over and over and over again, why it's so important that we ourselves fill that void. Now, I know that's super fucking depressing for a lot of you. And you're like, why do I have to be the one to fill this void? Because of shit like this. Because a therapist has a life. And It's not ethically appropriate for you to be part of that life outside of therapy. You are their patient and they're there to help you, right? Also, because other people will inevitably be unavailable, let us down in some way, maybe say something that's hurtful and not realize it. Or maybe they realize it, but people are fallible. We're not perfect, right? They're going to do things that they don't feel good for you in the moment. And that wound can feel like it gets bigger and bigger. And the only way to fill that is through ourselves, because we can count on ourselves, we can control ourselves, and we are the only ones that can truly heal that and fill that. And that's where some of that maybe inner child work comes from, some of that improving in our self-talk, all of that, offering ourselves, good mother messages, good father messages, or good friend messages. There's going to be a lot of healing that you might want to do in that space. I'd let your therapist know that like you're feeling like you've tried to put them in this hole in your life where friends or family should have been. And when you realize that they're not a part of that you aren't a part of their life outside a session, you feel that wound even like growing or even feeling more sensitive to it. I don't know if you feel comfortable saying it that way without saying like, I looked it up on social media and blah, blah, blah. You can say that if you want, but I know for a lot of you, you're like, I'd rather die. No therapist is going to think that's weird, by the way. But maybe you can talk about it that way, that like, I feel like there's this void from growing up and from, my childhood and this and that. And I find that I've tried to put you in that hole and fill that void, but now I'm just feeling even more lonely, because that's really where the work comes. And that's where we're going to have to start to repair. That's where we're going to have to find ways to remother ourselves or be a friend to ourselves, love on ourselves, speak kindly to ourselves. There's going to be a lot of that internal, what I usually call inner child work, but I don't know for you, it's all child related. It might be just inner you work so that we can fill that void and heal. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay. And yes, you will get to a point where this doesn't affect you, but that's why it's affecting you now. Final question number 5 says, Kati, I recently found your channel. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Yay. And I can't stop binge listening to your podcast. I hear that from a lot of people. I also hear from a lot of you that my voice is like soothing, put it on to go to sleep. So if that's helpful, I hope you're dreaming wonderful dreams. Okay. Now it says, can binge listening to my podcast, can doing this be an unhealthy coping skill to avoid my own thoughts and feelings? Or do you think that this could be something else? For context, I've been in therapy for 6 months. And my diagnosis was recently changed from adjustment disorder to depression and anxiety. I also recently started medication, but I've had a hard time accepting the diagnosis, despite knowing deep down that it's accurate and I need the additional help. It says, P.S. Your often used analogy of having a genetic predisposition to strep throat versus bronchitis in reference to the same being true for depression really helped me accept my diagnosis. So thanks for all you do. Of course, I'm so glad that I could be here. There was a comment on this that says, oh my God, same. Can binge listening to the podcast and Kati's videos be both a good and bad coping mechanism? On one hand, I really enjoy listening and learning about so many different angles on mental health, but on the other, it definitely does distract me from actually doing the work to help myself in my own mental health journey, though I try to take mental notes for later, LOL. This is a great question. And the truth is, binge listening to my podcast or my videos can be a wonderful distraction. It's not harmful. It's not hurting you or anybody else, unless you find it super triggering and then you end up self-injuring or using some other maladaptive coping skill like eating disorder behavior, suicidal ideation, all that stuff. If it makes that worse for you, then it's not helpful, okay? But overall, this is a wonderful distraction. But the thing that we're missing is the process-based coping skills. Now, in my old video where I talked about 25 coping skills, I broke them down into 2 groups, distraction-based and process-based. And we need a good mix of both. Meaning, distract is like, oh, I'm binge listening to this podcast. I am taking my dog for a walk. I'm going to clean my house. I'm going to cook a meal. I'm going to take a bath. I'm going to, put a puzzle together. I'm going to paint my fingernails. Those are all distraction-based coping skills. But process-based are things like journaling, talking to a friend about it, talking to our therapist about it. Maybe it means that we're doing a workbook or a worksheet that was offered to us. All of those things, like an impulse log. Those are all things that we will do that help us actually move through or process the feelings that we're experiencing. Now, we need a good combination of both, because if we feel too emotionally charged, let's say I'm super anxious, I'm not going to be able to journal in a healthy or helpful way. It'll feel very scattered. It can even make me feel more anxious. So I'm going to need to distract first to bring my anxiety back down to a level that's not overwhelming so that I can do the journaling and then it can be helpful. Does that make sense? So distractions are always going to need to be utilized as we maybe feel ourselves get overwhelmed or queued up in some way. We're going to need those. And then we're going to need the process-based ones to help us make sense of it, to actually work through it, to experience the emotion and know that it's okay. And so we're going to need both. And I feel like if you're only binge listening to my podcast, you're not taking notes on the homework that's offered, even if a question resonates with you. That's how we can turn it into a process-based coping skill. But if we're only distracting, then we're only doing half of the work. Again, it's not hurtful, but we're not processing. So we could be avoiding our own experiences, our own thoughts and feelings. And so the way to make this more beneficial or ensure that it's actually moving you in the right direction, maybe take some notes of if a question resonates, then what's the stuff that I talked to that, how did I answer that question? Is there any homework that I gave? Any journal prompts? Did it make you think about anything? Should I jot that down? That's a way to make this a distraction and process-based coping skill, and then we're good to go. So I don't really see it as a bad thing, but it could mean that we're avoiding. So just be aware. I think that it's, of all the distractions or all the coping skills out there, it's not a bad one. But yeah, we want to make sure that we're at least moving through it and not just distracting from it altogether. Thank you all so much for listening and watching. Thank you for sending in your questions. Like I said, this is the last podcast that we're going to do for a while. I will still do Q&As from, time and time again. Keep an eye out on that community tab, because that's where I will ask for your questions, just like I always have. But we'll do those just every so often. When I feel like, there's some questions that we need to answer, or I want to ask my whoever my guest is going to be some specific questions, I will pull those from you. So please keep an eye out on that. But thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening and watching all these years. I really love doing AKA, and I can't wait to see where it goes in 2025. Take care, do your homework, and I'll see you next time.